Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest installation of Podchaser Pro's webinar series. Happy Friday to you all. Thank you for spending some time with us today and for giving us your attention. We're going to get things kicked off here. Of course, I should probably share my screen. Do. Let's see. It's, I'm a notorious tab collector, which makes sharing screens a little bit more difficult than it needs to be. So I should be able to pull this up now. All right. If I could just get a quick confirmation in the chat, everybody can see my screen. Yes, awesome. Thank you, Jules, for the confirmation. John, appreciate you, man. Awesome. So today, what we're going to discuss is there's been some new and very interesting data as it pertains to the intersection of social media and podcasts, which obviously we know quite a bit about. And it felt like this was going to be an inevitable conversation, especially as over the last 6, 9, 12 months, we've been discussing the impact of video within the podcasting world and how that has coincided with the TikTokification of basically every social media platform that exists, whether that be YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok itself, even LinkedIn prioritizing video content within feeds as well. So again, this is going to be new data that's been presented by our parent company, Acast. So we often work in conjunction with them on some of the data studies that we do. But a lot of this is going to come directly from our fine friends over at Acast. And I think what's most important is going to be some of the key takeaways from this, especially if we are working in the earned media landscape, paid media landscape, so on and so forth, how it's going to impact our campaigns, what we should be doing about it, so on and so forth. So without further ado, we are going to start with a bang. If I can figure out how to slideshow view show. If you guys have been with us for a while, normally I do this on Canva, but today we're doing it in Google Slides. So apologize for the very unprofessional AV setup. But anyway, starting off with a bang. So we can conclusively say at this juncture that podcasting is now a multi-channel experience, with 18% of podcast consumers engaging through audio, video, and social. Now, this schematic might be a little bit difficult to see. And again, we'll send out this recording early next week so you can have a better bird's eye view of it. And then, of course, the access to the deck as well. But when we think of podcasts, and if we were to poll the general populace, even 2 years ago, most people would say podcasts are an audio format. Most people are listening to podcasts on their AirPods or in their car or over their smart speakers, that sort of thing. But it was primarily going to be this audio medium. And what was so special about it being an audio medium is it was um, a more intimate channel than almost every other one. In that when you put in your earbuds and you're listening to the podcast, it releases 3 new episodes a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. And that becomes part of your ritual and your routine. You're getting ready for work in the morning, you pop in your AirPods, you're brushing your teeth, and you've got your favorite creator telling you a new story, breaking certain news, so on and so, making you laugh, etc. There's something really strong about that, in that, again, it was part of this kind of an ingrained routine or ritual, if you will. And that still exists, obviously, depending on the individual. But as we see kind of the overall demographic of podcast listenership skew a little bit towards the younger side, more of these younger audiences and actually even older audiences are changing some of their consumption habits, which is actually changing the way in which we're reaching our podcast audiences as well. And obviously, this kind of Venn diagram overlapping is very much exemplifying that, right? So While it does feel a little strange or disorienting to lose some of the pureness of podcast as an audio medium, I think this actually is a huge win for earned media folks. So if you're a PR agency, if you are in-house comms teams, etc., especially because we've always wanted to tell our clients what the impact was of podcasts. And yes, obviously we're using Podchaser Pro to be able to show them what the episodic reach was for the guest appearance that we booked for them. However, I have always advocated, as well as our client success team, John, Jules, Sydney, that podcasts oftentimes are relying on social media for distribution of their content as well. So let's not ignore the amplification effect that happens as these episodes go live and get promoted by podcasters. And even a year ago, that felt like, yeah, that makes sense. Like I can logically get to that point. However, we'd never really had data to support that, right? So I think, again, the opportunity here from an earned media professional's perspective is to say, yeah, not only are we getting you this awesome reach in terms of audio, but we're also, again, amplifying this across social media. And knowing that so many more audience members are changing their consumption patterns to be more podcast specific, regardless of channel, which I guess we would call creator specific, regardless of channel. I think that makes it a really kind of a no-brainer slam dunk decision to add podcasts to the media mix for your clients because of this very strong social component that follows on with the audio component. So that would be my first takeaway with all of this is if you are a PR agency and you're already doing executive thought leadership or executive content, which I know has taken the world by storm. I can't go much more than 15 minutes without getting an email from somebody via, who's pitching a service to get myself or Bradley or Cole, two of Podchaser's co-founders, writing content for them on LinkedIn, getting them pitches as guests on podcasts, etc. So this whole kind of ghost written social media world that has really sprung to life over the last call it 12 to 24 months. Again, if you're not offering those types of services, if you're not doing this executive presence, you should be because it's just such a natural alignment between the guest appearance and then also the social promotion. And we'll get into some more examples about that down the road in this presentation. But that'd be the first takeaway. Now, I think the other thing to take a look at that is really interesting is 14% of these weekly listeners are listening to or are watching video podcasts only. And I personally don't watch video podcasts only. I listen to shows on Spotify when I'm at the gym. However, I have noticed that for some of the podcasts that I do consume, I'm not even watching them on my desktop. I'm actually connecting to my TV through my smart TV and going to YouTube on my smart TV and watching that show on my television as opposed to on my device. So that's another thing to take into consideration, especially for earned media professionals. If a show that you are pitching or you have gotten a yes to from your guest pitch on behalf of your client, if they do have a strong YouTube component, the way that we prepare our client for that is a lot different because again, there's not an insubstantial amount of people that might be consuming that video interview not just on their mobile device, but actually on a 67-inch Vizio TV, for example, right? So when we talk about audio video setup, when we talk about latency, when we talk about their professional presentation, what they're wearing, what's in their backdrop, the whole nine, like that becomes a much bigger deal because again, we're not using a screen that's this big. We're using, literally a television set. So again, this is going to vary by audience types. It's going to vary by podcast categories. It's going to vary by a number of different things. But again, this is to underscore that podcasts have really moved or evolved from being purely audio only to this multi-channel rich experience. And then the last one that we'll talk about here before we move on is that 19% of podcast clips on social media only. That's a crazy stat, and seeing that, I assume that this skewed younger, and then we'll see within the data that we present a little bit further in the presentation, it does skew younger in terms of audience demographics. However, when we're thinking about this from a guest preparation perspective, we need to enable our clients to not just be able to sit down for a 30, 60, 90, in some cases, 2 hour interview. We also need them to be able to speak in clip form, if you will. And this will be a small tease here, but uh, on October 3rd, we'll be talking with Dr. Adrian McIntyre, who's a participant in many of these webinars. Adrian, if you want to say hey, you can do that. But October 3rd, we're going to be talking about how to get guests prepared for this clippable world that we live in, as well as that long form combination. So again, stay tuned with that. There's Adrian. Say hey. And again, if you're not connected with Adrian yet, definitely connect with him on LinkedIn because we're gonna have some fun on October 3rd. But in any case, this is a new reality for us, and if we're accustomed to getting clients spots and CNBC lunch hours, for example, oftentimes those segments are, 90 seconds to 3 minutes long. It's going to feel a lot more like that in these clippable formats. But again, there's going to be a lot more content to come on that down the road. So just by a quick pulse of the audience, is there anything on this Venn diagram that surprises you seeing it for the first time? Go ahead and throw it in the chat as I quench my thirst. So many video watchers. Yeah, John and John, one of our client success managers. John's been a podcaster for a long time. Um, And with that, John, you've seen the evolution of kind of the podcast industry firsthand, obviously working here too. So yeah, video is definitely big. Jessica, it's actually pretty evenly split overall. Yeah, it is. Again, in the not so distant past, right? I think again the overall perception of podcasts, the number one word that would be part of a word association cloud would be audio. So again, having seen how quickly we've progressed through this, and again, I give this example all the time. I remember I think it was 2015, I was sitting at the Facebook Agency Partner Summit in Chicago with the agency that I was working at the time. And Facebook was pushing this idea that video is everything. Video is going to be in your WhatsApp Messenger. Video is going to be in your Facebook Messenger. Video is going to be all over your Facebook newsfeed and all over your Instagram. And it was 2015, and for a couple of reasons. One, video processing within phones wasn't quite strong enough yet. Cameras on phones weren't quite strong enough yet. So like it just didn't really materialize. And then of course people weren't conditioned to actually watch video content quite yet. Enter in TikTok and its predecessor Vine, um, different companies of course, but it really started to change the way in which we actually consume content. So now here we are, literally 10 years later, a full decade later, and video is having its moment. So yeah, I agree, Jess. It is interesting to see it pretty evenly split. However, I was not at all prepared to see the proportion be split. Again, I thought it was going to skew significantly more towards the audio side. Cool. So, um, another piece of this, and again, I think if we're going to look at this from an earned media perspective or paid media perspective, podcast clips on social deliver incremental reach, significantly amplifying the scale of weekly podcast audiences. So, again, you've heard me, if you've attended any of these before, I've talked about the value of repurposing guest interviews, the value of having UGC content for your paid media campaign, so on and so forth. And I've always used this term amplified. I, again, kind of trusted you to trust me to take my word for it. However, now that we actually have real data to support this, I think we should probably be leaning into this a little bit further. And with that, when we look at the incremental reach of adding podcast social clips, again, we're seeing almost a 50% bump, at least with these video and audio podcasts. When we talk about, going from 33% plus an additional 19%, again, that's going to be a huge increase compared to the baseline podcast channel. So a little bit further into this, we'll get into some ideas or some methods in which to make this possible for your clients, like some tools, some formats to try, so on and so forth. But again, if you're in earned media, so again, paid or excuse me, earned or marketing, PR, communications, etc., it really should be the expectation if you have clients that are doing podcast guest appearances that you should be going that extra mile to repurpose clips and repurpose content for this explicit purpose because you stand to benefit a lot more from it. Your client stands to benefit a lot more from it. You can get a lot more creative with the way that you package your monthly retainer services. You can get a lot more um, latitude, I think, in terms of creative process and that sort of thing as you actually provide solutions for your clients as well. I think very quickly this is becoming table stakes as opposed to nice to have. And I can speak to this firsthand as well. So again, for those that aren't familiar, Podchaser used to have a guest booking agency called Podchaser Connect. I oversaw that division for about 18 months before it was acquired by a different agency. And we started after about 3 months of me working with the department. We started to offer content repurposing services. And one of the best things that we did, and I don't take full credit for this. I mean, people like Gary Vaynerchuk and et cetera have been talking about content repurposing for years. But one of the great benefits that we saw is we were working with a dating app, and we repurposed one of their guest interviews into a blog post and then social assets. Just so happened that the editor of Teen Vogue picked up on the social asset, followed the breadcrumb trail, saw the blog post about it, followed the breadcrumb trail from there, saw the guest interview about it, and then ran a feature on that data point that was mentioned on the podcast. So that's why we should be doing these types of things. The amplification or halo effect that we can create is substantial. And again, if we're not doing it, there's really no excuse not to, especially with how strong some of these tools have become in the last few years. Another kind of interesting one. So, weekly podcast consumers find podcast clips on social more interesting, informative, and compelling than memes and brand ads. Now, as a meme aficionado myself, this pains me a little bit to say, however, the data does not lie. Um, but these podcast clips, again, being interesting, informative, or compelling is a huge win, I think, for us as earned media professionals, paid media professionals, so on. And here with this graph, again, you can take a screenshot of it if you'd like, but with this graph, it'll also be available next week. I think it's just interesting to see kind of the difference between each of these. So, especially as it pertains to influencer collabs with brands. Um, and again, this is going to be more of like a paid media specific talk track that I'm about to go on. But I think one of the interesting things that I've seen recently, especially in my social feeds, is it'll look like a podcast guest interview, and often it is a podcast guest interview, but it's the host of the podcast talking about the product, maybe with the founder of the product, um, and then it's being run as what we'll call UGC content or white label content on the brand social media page. And it looks like a real full-fledged endorsement for the product or the service that's being shilled. And it feels a lot more native or a lot more, I guess, authentic and believable than just like a static image that says, here's your 50% off coupon to try this new morning greens product or what have you, right? So I think again, looking at that difference or that delta between podcast clips and influencer collabs with brands, that should be a pretty positive signal. And if you are a brand marketer or a performance marketer, or you work at a brand and you are using podcasts primarily from a paid perspective, I want to clue you in on a little strategy that we used at Podchaser Connect, which we called the bookend strategy. And I think you're going to get a lot of utility out of it, especially in the context of this data. But how it would work is we would identify the podcast that our client wanted to work with or we felt was best for them to work with. And this bookend strategy went as such. So the big kind of lightning strike moment, of course, is going to be the podcast guest interview itself. So the host is going to interview the founder of the brand. But in the 2 to 3 weeks preceding the guest interview, we'd actually run host-read endorsements for the product. And this was primarily focused on an awareness campaign. So there weren't going to be strong or super salesy call to actions. It'd be maybe download a free report, take the quiz to see which product is right for you. A little bit softer, find more information about the product. So we'd run that for 2 to 3 weeks, and then at the end of that first 2 to 3 week run, the founder of the podcast would actually or excuse me, the founder of the brand would actually be interviewed as a guest on the podcast. And so we've built up this awareness, and now we're humanizing the brand, and hopefully that humanization helps podcast audiences know, like, and trust the brand even further. Because, oh, I've heard of that brand before. Oh, and this is the guy who started it or the gal who started it. And then once that guest interview is completed, for the next 2 to 3 weeks, we would run the second half of the campaign, which is why we call it the bookend strategy. Right on the front end, we've got the bookcase, and the back end, we've got the bookcase with that the book actually being in the middle. That's gonna be the founder interview. But on that second podcast ad run or host read endorsement run, instead of it being awareness, we're actually looking for conversion. So again, if we've done our job and built up awareness on the front end, we've humanized the brand to get that know, like, trust quotient right. It's going to be a lot easier to ask for the sale, and those call to actions are going to be more like, use your coupon code, get 10% off your first order, so on and so forth, using, the founder's name as the code, for example, because they're going to recall that, hey, I really like that guy. I really like John Dispenza and what he had to say about his pet cholesterol product, etc. So, and that's a little bit of an inside joke, but in any case, this bookend strategy is going to accomplish that influencer marketing play. And I think some of our better outcomes that we had from that strategy actually was the brand using the guest interview where they're talking about the product or talking about the founding story or talking about, the hero's journey of the product, etc. And they would also run that as user generated content ads on their own Instagram pages or TikTok pages, etc. So again, there's just so much you can do now with video. It's traditionally been the hardest media type to capture, again, because of technological issues, because of technical issues, right? Not everybody knew how to record or edit or manipulate video, but now it's gotten a lot easier. So again, just a quick little anecdote for you there as we kind of think about what this slide means for a paid perspective. Okay. Next thing we'll take a look at is, I don't know if you can read this, but 2 and 3 weekly podcast listeners discover new podcasts from social media clips and go on to watch or listen to episodes, which again is going to be proof that social media is going to be a huge discovery tool for not just podcasters themselves, but for the audiences or future audiences as well as the guests. So there's probably an entire presentation we can do about how to be a good guest, not just from a storytelling perspective, but after the episode goes live, what can you do to actually support the podcaster that took time out of their schedule, time out of their content production calendar, etc., to have you be a guest on their show? Um, we'll skip that for now, but at the very minimum, when a podcaster tags you or tags your client in a LinkedIn post after the episode goes live, can we please advise our clients to, at the very least, like, comment, and share the initial promotion for it? I think that's kind of table stakes at this juncture. They should probably be writing their own copy for their own version of the promo. They should probably, or you should be working with them to get the source files for the interview, whether that's the audio, the video, so on and so forth. A lot of podcasters, especially the more professional ones, will create a full-fledged kind of promotion kit that they'll send to their guests afterward. Again, you can use that, you cannot use that, but you got to do something because again, if we're just going to ignore the fact that a lot of people are finding new podcasts and finding new thinkers or new ideas as a result of podcasters sharing their content on social media, what are we even here for? So again, I think there's a huge opportunity here to be more intentional and more thoughtful about the promotion of these guest interviews after they actually go live. Yep, and there's Adrian. Topic for October 3rd: short clips, long tail. Why PR pros need to change the conversation about reach and what it means for how we do media training. So, thank you. I bungled it a little bit, but I knew you'd be there. And again, this all sounds good. The data seems great, but what does this actually mean? This is going to be data that's been proffered up by Sounds Profitable. If you're not familiar with Brian Barletta, Tom Webster, they do some incredible work, kind of advancing the podcast medium at large. But this is going to be data about podcasts relative to other media types during the study that they conducted in 2025. So when we look at the first kind of column here, it's going to be discuss product with others. Uh, People who heard about a product on a podcast are 3 times more likely to discuss a product with others than they were on Instagram, 4 times more likely than on TikTok, and 2 times higher than YouTube. These are going to also going to be people who search for more info about the brand on podcasts are going to be 3 times higher than YouTube, 4 times higher than connected TV, and 6 times higher than TikTok. And then again, those who are making immediate purchases, 83% higher than YouTube, 69% higher than Instagram, and 4 times higher than TikTok. So what starts to happen is when you start following podcasts or you get podcast content delivered to you in your social media feed. As we know, kind of the old world versus the new world of social media algorithms is the old world looked like you followed a page, you followed a creator, you would see that content in your feed. As TikTok really started to gain steam and they delivered a totally different algorithm that was not follow based, but it was interest based. It changed the way in which every other platform had to interact with its user base, right? And again, the goal of all of these social media platforms is not necessarily to make the world a better place, as we know, but it's to keep people on their platforms for as long as possible. Because the longer they can keep people on their platforms or their users on their platforms, the more ads they can deliver to them. The more ads they can deliver to them, the more they increase their shareholder value. The more they increase their shareholder value, the more they can, take these wild swings on whatever it is they feel like, whether it's AI or VR, et cetera. And I'll stop pontificating for a second. But again, the goal here is for people to stay on platform. So we know that interest-based targeting is a lot different than follower-based targeting. So that's good to know. Two, we know that because video is a relatively new enhancement to a lot of these platforms, typically when platforms bring out new features or new suites or tools, they prioritize those in terms of how content gets distributed. And I've seen this very much so happen on LinkedIn, where I can do a text-based post on LinkedIn, get a couple hundred impressions for it, but then I do a video one that is well reasoned and decent lighting, so on and so forth. Sometimes I get 5 times the amount of reach for that, and that's because LinkedIn's now prioritizing video because everybody else is. So again, these are going to be things that if we're not taking into consideration as part of our overall kind of podcast guesting workflow, we got to start doing it. The time is now. The time was actually probably 6 months ago. But again, I think this is a huge opportunity for both paid and earned folks alike. And again, I spent a couple minutes at the beginning making the case that podcasts are an audio format, or they always have been an audio channel. And now with the introduction of video, it's a multi-channel. I think maybe the best way to talk about podcasts is that it's hybrid. And as we try to adjust to this new reality, I think it's also important to understand what this is going to mean from like a content shelf life perspective. So I was fortunate to stumble upon this research that was done by Scott Graphius, and this was published in January of 2025. So I'd actually expect the data to probably change if he were to redo, the conditions for the study as well. But in his study, he looked at the quote unquote half life, or the time until engagement halves, of podcasts against traditional platforms or other social platforms, or Web 2 platforms, if you will. And so starting with podcasts, the average half-life in minutes is about 9,000, which the equivalent duration is going to be about a little over 6.5 days. Whereas X or Twitter, only 49 minutes, Facebook, a little over 1.3 hours, Instagram, 19 hours, YouTube, 9.67 days, and then blogs, 1.97 years. Now, blogs is an interesting one, right? Because blogs are going to be largely dictated by not social algorithms, but search algorithms. And we know that search has undergone a massive shift thanks to generative uh, engine optimization, so GEO or AEO or SEO, AEO, whatever we want to call it. But search has changed dramatically, especially since the beginning of the study's publishing. So I wouldn't read too deeply into that. Yes, we still want to have blog content that's going to accompany some of this. And I think Again, if I were to give advice to a PR agency or marketing agency that's doing guest booking, it should be table stakes. Yes, we're going to secure the guest interview for you. Yes, we're going to promote the clips on social media for you, or we're going to develop those. And then third, we should probably be doing some sort of written content off of that. So whether that's a summary or an article that's AEO optimized or GEO optimized, that also embeds the video from the podcast interview. That also has clips from the podcast interview, as well as some additional social assets from the podcast interview. So now you're doing everything. It's a full funnel type of effect. So that would be my advice. Again, this used to take multiple people on a team. Now it could take really one tool that could do all of this for you. And again, I'll provide some suggestions as to how to do that here in a second. But I find this pretty interesting. Um, cool. So earlier in the presentation, I alluded to the difference between age and demographics as it pertained to discovery of podcasts on social media. And like I said, it did skew a little bit towards the younger side. So and this is going to come from the Podcast Consumer 2025 by Edison Research. But this is going to ask a simple question: how Gen Z discovers podcasts. And Gen Z in this case is going to be defined as US population age 13 to 28 that listens to podcasts on a monthly basis. And before we just blanket write off Gen Z, because I know it's easy to do that, especially as a millennial myself. Millennials have been written off in basically every data study ever. Um, Gen Zs are not just teeny boppers any longer. They go all the way up to age 28. So if you remember where you were at in your career, age 22 to 28, obviously climbing the corporate ladder and those rungs. But as we get to like the later stage or the elder Gen Z, if you will, they're starting to ascend into, what we'll call smaller decision-making capacities. So even if you're in B2B, for example, and you don't think that your target audience is Gen Z for your client's SaaS product, at the very least, they're going to be end users for it, and they're going to start to enter into that period in which maybe not next year, maybe not this year, but over the next couple of years, they are going to be primed to be decision makers for these types of things. And the way that they consume content is vastly different than how somebody who's age 50 consumes content right now, or 35 consumes content right now, right? So before we write off Gen Z, know that this is going to be the way in which they communicate, and it's kind of our jobs as, I think, communicators to understand where that trend line is falling and help our clients adjust for it. But to get to the task at hand here, 28% of Gen Z discover a podcast by searching on YouTube. So again, we already know that video component's really, really important. How we work with our clients to understand that podcasts are not just going to be this audio component, but also this video component, that additional lift that we can get from YouTube. As we know, YouTube is owned by Google, second largest search engine in the world. There's significant SEO and AEO implications as it pertains to content. So that's the first and foremost one. The second one's going to be social media posts themselves with 26%. Friends and family is still a big driver of discovery for podcasts for Gen Z, and I don't think that's ever going to change. However, we're not seeing this happen IRL, as the kids would say, in real life. These are typically happening in group chats. And if you know Gen Z folks, like I get to come across a few of them. My kids are much younger than that, but they like just text each other in like Snapchat and stuff, which is really strange because when Snapchat came out, when I was, I think, in college, we didn't use it for text messaging. We use it for a lot of other things, but not text messaging. So in any case, they're sending things in different modes and different formats. They're in group chats. They're in text threads. They're on Discord servers. They're communicating in a totally different way. So yes, there is so much of that friends and family that's never going to go away. Like referral based marketing is always going to be an important thing, but the way in which you package the thing to be shared is going to be huge. So it's going to be a lot easier for even a Gen Z person to share a 30-second clip of your client directly in Instagram messaging, as opposed to taking a link, copying it, pasting it, sending it to an email, whatever. Like that's not how they communicate. Everything has to be done kind of like within the platform. So again, I think this represents a really interesting opportunity for us and for our clients. Um, Gen X is the ultimate overlooked written off generation. Yes, this is true. Um, so okay, hopefully that's enough data for you to wet your whistle. We do have a couple more slides here that are not going to be quite as related to social, but before we get to kind of that next part of it, I'd be remiss if I didn't explain how Podchaser Pro can support this new reality. And the good news is we've been working on a lot of things behind the scenes to capitalize on this. As a lot of you guys know, the way in which we pull our demographic information is going to be based on social graphs of the following social following for certain podcasts. So we're already very much ahead in that respect. The video stuff, I think we've got some very exciting things coming down the road that are being prioritized in Q4, so stay tuned for that. However, as it currently exists, there are quite a few things that we can leverage when it comes to addressing this new reality of this multi-channel approach that we have, or this hybrid approach that we have. First thing I think you should definitely take a look at is the YouTube subscriber count filters. So if you go into like the podcast section within Podchaser Pro, on that left rail, we're gonna have all kinds of filters we can play with. And if memory serves, the YouTube subscriber filter is going to be under the demographic tab, almost nearly to the bottom. Um, the way that I like to look at that is, put in a minimum threshold and then a maximum threshold. And I know, yeah, sure, it'd be great to get my client on a podcast that has 1 million YouTube subscribers. I also know that's not really going to happen. So I like to use like realistic ranges. So I like to avoid shows that might only have like 50 subscribers. So I might do the range of 50 to 5,000 subscribers. And maybe that's going to be good enough. Then I go into those shows and see the quality of those shows. Are they doing this with a full AV setup? Are they only publishing the video or only publishing the audio file to YouTube, which is a whole other thing? Um, so in any case, there's a lot more discovery we can do from that, but it is an interesting jumping off point if we want to prioritize some of these hybrid or multi-channel campaigns. Of course, if you've used Podchaser Pro before, you also know that we have links to the social profiles within the Insights tab for podcasts. We are actively adding significantly more social handles to our coverage for a couple of reasons. One, because it helps with our demographic data, but two, for this very reason that we're discussing this hybrid approach. Oftentimes, we can find some hidden gems as a result of this, and sometimes there's an inverse effect wherein somebody who's got really strong social media following is only first getting into podcasting or hasn't been doing podcasts for a long time. And often, when that's the case, oftentimes you're going to get a significantly more reach on the social promotion that they do for the episode than you do even on the audio component. Now, again, depending on how you interact with the clients, interface with clients, set expectations for clients, that might be a huge boon to you. That might not mean anything at all, again, depending on those factors. But taking a look at that is going to be a big kind of unlock here. And then lastly, we do have a social profiles filter. This is internal only, but if you do have a client success manager you work with, so John, Jules, or Sydney, this is something that they can help with, especially if you're leveraging our list building services. So let's say you've got a client that has a huge desire to grow on their TikTok or their Instagram or what have you. If you want to prioritize shows that already have strong or established TikTok or Instagram followings or pages, you could, as part of your list request, add that to some of the criteria for your next campaign. And again, this is just going to be, whoops, there's going to be some of our, whoops, it's going to be some of our coverage for various profiles that we have. So we don't pull the social data as part of the demographic data. We don't pull the social graph data from TikTok, from Twitch, from Patreon, or from LinkedIn. However, we do have access to all of those. So again, this is going to be a nice thing for you guys too. Yeah, and as Jules points out, please do reach out to your CSM if you'd like us to look these up for you, as you should. All right, so next we'll just quickly look at some of the low lift ways to make podcast content more social. One of the easiest things to do, honestly, I don't know why I don't do it more, is screen grab from recordings. So even like this webinar recording, like is a webinar, what's a webinar these days? I mean, it technically could be a podcast. Obviously, I throw these up on our YouTube channel after they go live. Is a YouTube page a podcast? I don't know. Whatever. Point being, I can take a screenshot of me talking on one of these recordings for you, and I can overlay text over that. It doesn't cost me a single dollar, and I can post it with some thoughtful copy above it. It looks like somebody thought I had something really meaningful or insightful to say. And as a result, the post ends up performing really well. And then it creates a funnel to get people back to our next webinar, like the one we have with Dr. Adrian on October 3rd. I put that link in the comments, and all of a sudden it looks like a much more kind of dialed in professional setup. So even if you don't get access to the raw files for your clients, if they've done video podcast interviews, when it goes live on YouTube, just take a screenshot of your client speaking, of your client interacting with the host, and put some copy overlay, ideally of what they said, and not something crazy, but and then use that as a social asset, which again you can put or use that as an image asset, which you can use on social media, of course. Put a link to the interview in the description or in the comments or in the replies of the post itself. You can embed that image within a blog post or a write up you're doing, or if your client has a newsletter, you can embed that in there and then put another link to the interview so people can hear it, so on and so forth. So super easy, super low lift. Anybody can do it. I think even my kids could probably do it even faster than me. So again, highly recommend. Um, yes, good. So the next thing is going to be kapwing.com. And let's say that your client doesn't get or you don't get the actual video asset from the recording that they did with the podcaster. If the podcaster has uploaded it to YouTube, you can take that YouTube link, copy it, throw it into Kapwing, and paste that, and it'll pull the full video without any of like the weird branding stuff or anything like that. And then you can cut that interview down to like the length that you need it to be. And again, is it better to ask for forgiveness or permission? Well, if you've asked for permission, you haven't received an answer yet. I think at that point, you just move on to asking for forgiveness. But this is like one of the easiest ways. I use a paid version of Kapwing because I do this kind of a lot. However, I think some of their plans are like as low as like $10 a month, and then they've also got a free version of it. But as someone who's a non-technical video person, I have found it to be the easiest way in which I can edit or trim or cut video. Again, knowing literally nothing about it. If you want to know somebody who knows a lot about video editing, that'd be that John Dispenza guy who I've referenced a couple of times on this call. John is very well versed in video editing, and when I ask him to help out with some of our video projects that we do, they look a lot better. But again, if we're looking for just being able to provide assets to our clients, a tool like Kapwing is going to help a ton. Canva also has a lot of these features as well. Chances are you're probably already paying for a tool like Canva or somebody on your team is. It's a little less user friendly from my experience in the video editing component. And again, you're not going to be able to rip video from YouTube as simply as you can with Kapwing. However, if you do have assets, it's a lot easier to get kind of predefined templates through Canva. So in any case, those are going to be three tools that we like to use here. So I wanted to include this slide because it is recent data, but I also think what we're starting to see even more so is this kind of combined paid and earned um, planning or strategy within in the podcast realm. And if you're only earned and you swear by earned and that's the hill you're going to die on, I totally get it. You can plug your ears now. However, I think data points like this are going to be a little bit harder to ignore as we see the maturation of the podcast industry specifically. And I don't know if anybody caught the news earlier this week, but YouTube just announced dynamically inserted ads are going to be available on the YouTube advertiser platform, which is a huge win because dynamically inserted ads have always, not always, but have been a podcast kind of specific monetization tool over the last few years. And now that YouTube is going to allow it, it allows podcasters to basically sell inventory against their entire backlog of podcast content. and they can monetize videos that they might have produced, 5, 6 years ago. So rather than having a baked in ad, it's going to be, new, fresh advertising content. So in any case, I mentioned that bookend strategy earlier on, and I think this kind of underscores that again, just with some more data. Return on ad spend is going to be huge, and I know we get a lot of questions, especially from our earned media clients, about pay to play. So those are going to be the podcasts that charge to have interviews on. I'm not necessarily for or against any of that. I just would say that if you are going to do a pay to play interview, I might actually recommend that you put in a little extra into the kitty, if you will, to run some ads around it so you can get this positive ROAS metric and kind of deploy that strategy in a kind of a backwards way, but still worthwhile. So again, a plus 26% higher ROAS is going to be big. And again, this is going to be something that's a little bit more industry centric, but as people that are working on the periphery of the podcast industry, if you're a PR agency or you work for one or you're a book publisher or what have you, uh, the floodgates really haven't opened up yet for podcast advertising. They've certainly it's been a steady stream over the last couple of years, and especially since November 2024. I just want to prepare everybody that there's a very strong likelihood that the podcast medium is going to get significantly more crowded and or noisier in the next 12 to 24 months for a lot of different reasons. One is, and the most important one, is that it works. So as we are trying to find earned media opportunities and advertisers are trying to inject paid media opportunities into it, as earned media professionals, we know that we're oftentimes in conflict with some of our advertising cousins, if you will. So when that happens, let's say like you're trying to work with a podcast and one of their named sponsors for the next six weeks is your client's competitor. That effectively boxes your client out of the podcast, certainly for the next quarter, but potentially for the entire year or for all time. So again, I just want to prepare everybody for this because it's a reality that I think we just should be aware of. And again, not every show is ever going to get monetized. A vast majority of podcast ad spend goes to the very very top of the podcast world, like your top 100 shows, etc. But as we see this interest affinity towards podcasts and the performance of podcasts play out, do not be surprised to see these things have second and third order effects as you're trying to get your clients booked as guests on podcasts. Um, so 82% of global marketers agree investing in targeting multicultural audiences remain a priority. Again, I want to emphasize this point because podcasts are so unique in this respect. Podcasts really have one of the more diverse kind of audience types, generally speaking. And then we already know like people focus more when they listen to podcasts. They're looking to be entertained or informed. Like there's a lot of good things going on for podcasts and why we want to work with them. But knowing this, and this is gonna how I tie the bow around this kind of uh, quick trip around the world that we took. When a diverse audience exists, what we want to know is how do they follow their creators that they're interested in, and this is how we're going to tie it back to the social component. So when overall, 64% have followed a podcast or podcast host on social media. And when we look at that compared to Black audiences or Hispanic audiences, those numbers are actually significantly higher. So if you're a brand or if your client is a brand that is targeting diverse audiences, again, knowing this is going to be a huge boon, I think, for everybody. Next one are 58% are likely to follow media personalities on multiple platforms. Overall, that's 58%, but for Black audiences, that's 70%, and Hispanic audiences, that's 78%. It's a very strong reason, I think. And then finally, like seeing or hearing favorite podcasts in places outside of shows such as social media. So again, this is how we're going to tie the bow in the social media conversation. But overall, 21%, Black 26%, and Hispanic 24%. So again, there's a lot of opportunity that exists within podcasts. I think we've really established the point that podcasts are now a hybrid medium or multi-channel, whatever we want to call them. There's gonna be a lot of ways in which you can use Podchaser Pro to find more of these social first or social complementary opportunities. We've got more coming down the pike as it pertains to the Podchaser Pro product itself with features and discovery. You're always going to be able to take advantage of our client success team. We really do work on behalf of you guys. And again, I hope you walk away from this inspired to not just maybe take the leap into podcast for the first time, but maybe revisit your podcast strategy, generally speaking. It can be difficult. Like obviously there's 5.7 million shows within our data set, and finding the right ones can often be difficult for us, for you, for your clients, etc. But I really struggle to find a medium that has more amplification opportunity than podcasts do. And that might change over time. Of course, everything does, but it's like the perfect storm right now of consumption habits, the removal of traditional media from most people's prime way in which they consume information. It just really seems like this is the time to start doing this, start doing the podcast stuff. So hopefully you've got some good ideas from there. All right. Let's see. I will throw it over to comments. Oh, so real quick, Adrian says YouTube also announced a bunch of new creative tools like VO3 plus Shorts and a huge live streaming update for YouTube. Yeah. Again, so if a near Luddite like myself can make passable video content, I think you can too. Ideally, you've got somebody who's in multimedia within your agency or your firm who specializes in that sort of thing. But again, like having it be a nice to have to a must have, I think is kind of the precipice we find ourselves on now. Let's see. Any other questions, comments? I know we've got about 8 minutes here. And again, just to underscore the point, October 3rd, I don't think you're going to want to miss that one. That's going to be our webinar with Adrian. Short clips, long tail, why PR pros need to change the conversation about reach and what that means for how we do media training. That's coming up in a couple weeks. All right, if there's no other questions, some parting words. Please get in contact with your client success manager. If you haven't talked to John or Jules or Sydney in a while, tell them, hey, maybe you're gonna walk away from this with a request to get some more Instagram specific podcasts. That'd be awesome. Two, definitely please be on the lookout for the webinar recording as well as the deck that'll go out early next week, usually Monday or Tuesday. Third, um, have a great weekend. This is an exciting time for podcasts, and yeah, again, appreciate you guys taking some time with us on every Friday. All right. If you haven't, oh, and also if you haven't had a Podchaser Pro demo before, I think most of us here are Podchaser Pro users. But if you haven't, obviously reach out to our sales team, sales@podchaser.com, if you need a tour. So anyway, everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you October 3rd.